like to thank everyone for being here tonight. To those of you who walked or drove or taxied or Ubered or paddled, welcome to Gaston Hall on this 24th day of Black History Month. Yes, it's nasty outside, but I say, let it rain. Bring on the thunder. Because nothing will dampen this celebration of Black Georgetown Remembered. My name is Richard Brown. I'm the director of Georgetown University Press, which had the privilege of publishing the first edition of Black Georgetown Remembered in 1991, and now, 25 years later, a new edition that includes a new introduction by Kathleen Menzies-Lesko and a foreword by Georgetown's own Maurice Jackson. Tonight we're celebrating a book, and it's a landmark book to be sure, but far more important, we're celebrating people. We're honoring a community, those proud citizens who, in the words of Kathleen Lesko, are dedicated to preserving the African American heritage of the people who once populated the Georgetown neighborhood. We have a wildly entertaining program for you this evening, one that will include some music, a video clip, a panel discussion, and I want to mention right out of the gate that this program will be recorded and that it will be available for viewing on the Georgetown University YouTube channel in a couple of weeks. There are many, many people who've made vital contributions to the Black Georgetown Remembered project, both the video and the book, and several of them are here with us this evening. So I'd like to ask them to stand and to be recognized when I mention their names, but I ask that you please hold your applause until I'm finished introducing everyone. Thank you for that. Father Charles Curry, whose leadership and support of the Black Georgetown Remembered project as director of the university's bicentennial celebration in 1988 and 89 was essential for making this project happen, and particularly for the fundraising he did personally. Thank you, Father Curry. The success of the Black Georgetown Remembered project was also the result of the cooperation and generosity of the pastors of the Black Georgetown churches. In one of the appendices of the book, you'll see brief histories of all these churches, and with us tonight are Reverend John Z. Cogman, pastor of Mount Zion United Methodist Church, which is celebrating its 200th anniversary this year. It's the oldest Black church in Washington, D.C. Congratulations on your anniversary, Reverend Cogman, and thank you for being here. The Reverend Rodney A. Teal, pastor of Jerusalem Baptist Church. Many years ago, the authors conducted the interviews for the video at that site with the support of Reverend Clinton Washington, the pastor of Jerusalem at that time. Thank you, Reverend Teal, for representing Jerusalem Baptist Church. Reverend Robert K. Pines of First Baptist Church. Thank you, Reverend Pines. Good to have you here. A special thank you to the Reverend, it's hard to resist, isn't it? Clapping. A special thank you to the Reverend Kirk D. Monroe Sr., the pastor of Mount Zion United Methodist Church, when the original edition of this book and the video were published, whose enthusiasm and passion for the project made everything possible. He's traveled from Baltimore to be here with us tonight. Thank you, Reverend Monroe. I want to also mention Father Adam Park, who could not be here this evening. He's at Epiphany Catholic Church. He regrets that he couldn't be here. He's celebrating Mass. I think that's a pretty good excuse for him not to be attending with us. I also want to thank and recognize Joy Austin, the Executive Director of the Humanities Council of Washington, D.C. We're thankful to the Humanities Council for awarding Georgetown University 2 challenge grants for the Black Georgetown Remembered video and book project. Thank you, Joy Austin. In addition, I'd like to thank Joe Ferreira of the President's Office at Georgetown for his help, as well as two of my colleagues at Georgetown University Press, our publicity manager, Jackie Beilhart, the queen of logistics, for making this event happen, and our editorial and production manager, Glenn Saltzman, who was responsible for what can only be described as a stunningly beautiful act of bookmaking. Please join me in giving these individuals a warm round of applause in appreciation for their contributions. Now, I just have to introduce a few more members of a family. I want you to take a look on this screen. That distinguished gentleman is George Martin, who's the owner of the Blue Mouse Theater. We have with us tonight Reginald Martin, Jr., his grandson, and his wife, Barbara Martin. We have with us tonight Maya Martin, the great-great-granddaughter of George Martin. And we have Ada Martin, the great-granddaughter of George Martin. Could we give them a round of applause, please? After our program this evening, we'll continue the celebration into the hallway, down one level, where we'll have a reception. Copies of the book will be for sale right outside the door here, and information tables for two important organizations will be set up. One, the DC Historical Preservation Office, and two, the Citizens Association of Georgetown for its Oral History Project. I encourage you to please visit those tables. It's now my great privilege to introduce Professor Maurice Jackson, who will offer his own introductions and then moderate our panel this evening. Professor Jackson teaches in the History Department and the African American Studies program and is affiliated professor of music at Georgetown University. Before coming to the Academy, he worked as a longshoreman, a shipyard rigger, a construction worker, and as a community organizer. And make no mistake, history has shown us that there is a future for those who are community organizers. Professor Jackson is the author of Let This Voice Be Heard, Anthony Benezet, Father of Atlantic Abolitionism. He's also the co-editor of two books, African Americans and the Haitian Revolution, and Quakers and Their Allies in the Abolitionist Cause, 1754 to 1808. He's now at work on another book, Halfway to Freedom, African Americans and the Struggle for Social Progress in Washington, D.C. Professor Jackson is co-editor of a recent special issue on jazz in D.C. in the journal Washington History. His article, titled Washington, D.C., From the Founding of a Slave-Holding Capital to a Center of Abolitionism, appeared last year. He also wrote the liner notes to two jazz CDs. Now, this is a true Renaissance man. Two jazz CDs by Charlie Haydn and Hank Jones steal away spirituals, folk songs, and hymnals, as well as Come Sunday. He's a 2009 inductee into the Washington, D.C. Hall of Fame. He was recently appointed by the mayor and the council of the District of Columbia as the first chair of the D.C. Commission on African American Affairs. He serves as special advisor on D.C. affairs to Georgetown University President Jack DeGioia. Ladies and gentlemen, please offer a warm welcome for Professor Maurice Jackson.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. We shall start off the program with special remarks by Chris Murphy, who's the incoming Vice President for Federal Relations and Community Engagement.
Thank you so much, Professor Jackson, and what an incredible honor it is for the university to host this amazing event tonight. President DeGioia very much wanted to be here tonight, but unfortunately, because of some long-planned travel, he's out of town and very, very much regrets not being here. He actually wrote a brief letter that he asked me to share with you all tonight. To members of the Georgetown University community and members of the Washington, D.C. community, dear ladies and gentlemen, I write to share my regrets that I am unable to be with you for tonight's wonderful celebration. Black Georgetown Remembered is an extraordinary account of the black women and men who lived and worked in our city since its earliest days, and I cannot begin to express how much the book has meant to me and how much it has enriched the way we understand the history of our city. I wish to also offer my sincerest gratitude to all those who worked on the 25th anniversary edition of this book, especially Professor Maurice Jackson, Kathleen Menzie-Lesko, Valerie Babb, and Carol Gibbs. Thank you for your commitment to telling the history of Black Georgetown and to reimagining the book for a new generation. You all have my very best wishes for a terrific evening. Sincerely, John J. DeGioia. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Sam Harvey here? Sam Harvey was the vice president many years ago when the book was first printed and played a great signal contribution. Chris Murphy here is in charge of federal relations and community affairs. If you have any problems, if you live around D.C., you come to him. If you want it fixed, you come to him. That's his job. We plan to work him very hard. I should say, I do want to say that this is African American History Month, and Georgetown has embarked on several initiatives. One, and I'm sure Dr. DeGioia would want you to know, was that about 2 weeks ago, he made a special announcement establishing an African American Studies department at this university, African American Studies major. Thank you. The hiring of any number of African American faculty over the years, and the establishment of an institute to study issues of racial justice and injustice. And of course, many of us look forward to that, hoping that the proper mechanisms will be put in place for it to work and to flourish. The second is that Georgetown University has established a working group for slavery and remembrance to honor those enslaved Africans who were owned by the Jesuits, who were tragically sent down south and sold. And so Georgetown has decided to rename 2 buildings that were named after the Jesuits who had sold the slaves. This commission is headed by a Jesuit, Dr. David Collins, S.J. You know, in the black tradition, we say, if you know long enough, you remember Ralph Abernathy would say, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Dr. And so we have a mixture here between the Catholic tradition and the prophetic African American tradition. It gives me great pleasure now to ask you all to stand as the members of the Georgetown Youth Spiritual Choir, Chapel, and Gospel Choir, under the direction of Dr. James Wickham and Mr. Philip Carter, will lead us in a rendition of Lift Every Voice and Sing. I personally Xeroxed the copies of the song, so I do expect to hear some noise. Father Kemp here, as he would say, let the church say amen. Thank you. I would like now to bring Mr. David Powell forward. He will give a brief introduction to the film Black Georgetown Remembered. He was the principal person behind the initial. He's an award-winning film producer, producing a wonderful Emmy-winning document On Our Own, Roberta Flack. Mr. Powell.
Just to reinforce the brief, it's a 4x6 card. So, as is normal with events like this, I'd like to start off by thanking a few people. First of all, Father Curry. This project came on the tail of a bicentennial show that I did for Georgetown University. And after working with Father Curry for a year on that project, I was a little surprised when he called and said, Dave, would you help again? Thought he might have been tired of me. He said, we really did a good job commemorating the 200 years of the university, but we really need to reach out to the black community. Would you be willing to help with that? And I said, well, of course I would. So I came down to a meeting, and we talked about how to handle the project. And I came with a personal agenda. I went to elementary school in Southeast Washington. I went to middle school in Seat Pleasant, Maryland, and District Heights. I went to high school at High Point High School in Prince George's County, and I went to the University of Maryland. In all of that time, I never had a black person in my class at all, which is amazing. So we talk a lot about segregation. It was working both ways. And I felt that it was a tremendous loss on my part to have been that way. I was one of the founding guys at WETA, and we started, after we got established, on the Howard campus. So I began to make amends for the stranger that I had made myself from the black community. So I was really very interested in this project. And what I wanted to do was have the people tell their own story. And at one of the initial planning meetings, I think it was Father Curry, who said, well, how can we put the university, Georgetown University name on a film that is not historically accurate? And I wanted the people to tell their own stories, and if they were telling stories, they might not have been, completely what actually happened. So I said, I think what we should do, and this was sort of the kernel in this whole project, I said, I think what we ought to do is call it Black Georgetown Remembered. And when I said that, I was thinking what that meant was the people would be telling their stories as they remembered Georgetown. But it grew into a much bigger and deeper meaning than that, not only for me, but for everybody else. And it was having us make sure that we remember Black Georgetown. In addition to Father Curry, it's traditional to thank people, I'd like to thank Kathy Lesko, who, her strength and tenacity kept this project on track through the video production and on into the book. And it was her idea to get the churches involved. And that's what made this whole project as wonderful as it was. I'd like to thank Larry Klein, who was the writer on the project. He went through dozens of hours of interviews that we did to make a story that made sense, a heartfelt story. Most of all, I want to thank everyone associated with the project who opened their hearts to the projects and their hearts to the camera. We actually had 2 people break down and cry while we were taping. And I think one of the keys to that was we didn't have people sign releases for the show. I wanted them to be sure that they knew that I or Georgetown University or anybody else would ever make a profit on their stories that they were sharing with us. Now, the bad part was that this show has not been commercially available for 25 years. Oh, okay. They're starting the music at the Academy Awards. So anyway, but now, for the first time, the show is available on the Georgetown University Press website, so please take the 40 minutes to watch the whole thing. This is a 10-minute clip. I let the credits run for a minute at the end so you could really see everybody who worked on it. So thank you very much and enjoy.
Hello, I'm Valerie Babb. I want to tell you a story about a community that once lived here in Georgetown. That Georgetown looked nothing like the Georgetown we see today. Not as fancy or expensive, not as affluent, and perhaps, most interestingly, not as white. In fact, the Georgetown that we will remember in this program was one of the most important Black communities in the city. That community was marked by its pride and self-esteem, its love, and its ability to make everyone who lived here feel part of a very special place. This is Black Georgetown Remembered.
My grandmother tells me that she was about 4 years old at the end of slavery, and she came from Rockville.
My grandfather was a slave in Montgomery County, and he came to Georgetown about 1865.
My grandfather was a native Virginian from Amosville, Virginia, in Rappahannock County. The story is he left home as a young man with 25 cents in his pocket, somehow got to Washington and put himself through school, became a physician.
The Georgetown community has a long and rich history, and the achievements of its Black residents are a central part of that history. Long before the Civil War, this once thriving commercial center on the Potomac River was home to a large, self-reliant, free Black community, even though slavery also flourished along Georgetown's streets and wharves. Hundreds of Black men and women settled in Georgetown, raised families, and established businesses, schools, and churches. Mount Zion United Methodist Church on 29th Street is the oldest Black congregation in the District of Columbia. The first U.S. Census in 1790 listed 34 free Blacks as heads of families in Georgetown. By 1810, over a third of the city's population was Black, most of them slaves. This proud, vibrant community was also made up of free Blacks like Libby Adams, William Fields, Millie Gant, and Joseph Moore, who first earned his freedom and then opened a market. Alfred Lee, owner of a prosperous feed store at 29th and M Streets, was one of the richest Blacks in the city. When he died in 1868, he left an estate of over $100,000. After the Civil War, many more Blacks settled in Georgetown. Between 1860 and the 1880s, the Black population jumped from 1,900 to nearly 5,000. But by the turn of the century, Georgetown was in economic decline. The village slipped into a quaint lethargy in the shadow of Washington. Georgetown became a community of sharp economic contrasts, rich, middle class, and very poor. But the Black community maintained its historic energy and independence. Led by men like Alfred Pope and others, it boasted an impressive array of doctors, musicians, teachers, craftsmen, and day workers who kept their pride despite the indignities of racial segregation. The strength of the Black community was in the diversity of its people, churches, and businesses. This wonderful mix of urban life helped Georgetown sustain one of the most remarkable Black communities in the history of the nation's capital.
Just about every occupation covered was represented by a Black man. We had coal yards, we had delicatessens, we had in professional groups, we had undertakers, we had pharmacists, we had doctors, so that there was just a mixture on all levels, professional, federal, and otherwise.
For one thing, we had a lot of entrepreneurs here. People were engaged in so many different kinds of businesses. Those who had horse and wagons were doing moving. They were going downtown in drayage, bringing the materials back and getting salvage out of that.
Everybody struggled and worked hard to make a living.
That is right. And my father, of course, he worked for the district government, but he drove teams, and that's $1 a day, $1.50, $2, I guess, something like that. And things were up. And then the wives would help the husbands with the children and all. Most of the wives stayed home and took in laundry and to make ends meet and reared the children.
That was the thing that kept us together. And our parents saw that we had food when they didn't have it.
We had beautiful parents, mother and father. My mother done domestic work, washing and ironing in the home. And my father was a porter in a store. And that living took care of us. How, I will never know. My mother was able to give 2 of us piano lessons.
I imagine everyone was poor, but you didn't feel that you were poor because everyone was in the same boat, you know.
Nobody knew it. Everybody was poor, but nobody knew it because everybody helped everybody. If you had someone living next door to you that wanted something, and you had something, you gave them something.
When you go to the store, if the grocer knew you, you might buy just a little of it, but he'd give you a lot of it. You pay for a little, and he'd give you a lot.
And it seemed as though after my father passed, everyone just seemed to just take me under their wing. Everybody called me Little Millicent, even the teachers and whatnot.
I remember when my mother was sick, she was sick sometime, and the different friends of hers and the organizations used to appoint people to sit up with you at night when you were very sick.
When my mother died, my father was very young. My mother died when I was 14, and my mother died at 32. She was very young. And he had 3 daughters. I have 2 sisters, and I'm the oldest of the 2. And he was sort of at a loss as to how to take care of us after she passed. So we had 20 mothers. Everybody on the block was our mother after that.
Everybody here had been here for a couple of generations. There were no strangers. That's something I should say. There were no strangers in Georgetown among the black community. You knew not only which barber shop a person went to, you knew who their barber was. You wanted to tease somebody, you knew everybody's mother's name. It was remarkable.
Everybody corrected you if you were wrong. There was no such thing as doing something and your mother not finding it out. And you were punished at home as well as by the person who saw you do it. And I think that makes a difference in children growing up and having respect.
Well, it was a strong community. I think the relationship between the people that lived there was very, very strong. We all had a lot of respect for one another, and I think that made, I guess, better men, better women out of some of the people that came out of Georgetown.
With segregation, you knew where you belonged, so you stayed away. It was pleasanter to stay away than to be put out. It didn't make any difference what you looked like. They knew who was and who wasn't, and it didn't let you in. We always thought we were better than the people in Washington. We really did. If you came from Georgetown, you were just Georgetown. That was it. You didn't ever become Washington. And even though I've lived in Washington all these years, I still think of Georgetown. And everybody else does the same thing.
I love Georgetown. I still love it as much as I did when I was growing up.
Well, I'm very, very proud of my roots in Georgetown, and every occasion that I have to mention it and to brag about it, so to speak, I do.
Georgetown is really home to me. I think everywhere I went, I knew that someday I was going to come back.
Because I miss that part of my life. We do very well. We get along very beautiful now, but they don't have that love that we had then.
We had stayed, all of them had stayed.
Yeah, those were the days. Oh, yeah.
And now we'd like to bring to the stage the wonderful members of our panel. I should say that Carol Gibbs is not able to make it tonight. He had a previous appointment. But as they come to the stage, I'll introduce Dr. Valerie Babb, who you saw on the picture, who had formerly graced us here at Georgetown as a professor. If you look in your program, you can see the full bio, but she's a professor, the Franklin Professor of English and African American Studies at the University of Georgia, former director of the Langston Hughes Papers, and author of 17th and 18th century African American literature. Next, a principal person behind this effort, Dr. Kathleen Lesko. Dr. Lesko had graced us here at Georgetown for many years, working as the associate to then President Timothy Healy, and since then she's been very active in the humanities movement. Mr. Vernon Ricks, a third-generation Washington Air Force veteran, graduate of McKinley Tech High School, man of all means, former politician, active in the NAACP. Next, Dr. Monica Roche, Georgetown activist, member of the Advisory Neighborhood Commission in Georgetown, former member of the Epiphany Catholic Church, and most recently, the principal person behind the effort to change the name of the Rose Park Tennis Court to the Margaret and Matilda Peters Tennis Court, named after two tremendous African-American tennis players. And of course, last but not least, Mr. Neville Waters III, activist in all things in Washington, especially in the public arena, has been active in the human rights campaign, organizers of efforts around World Cup soccer matches, a fifth-generation Washingtonian. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you this great panel, and we'll start from this end, and we'll have a good time.
Well, good evening to everyone, and thank you for coming out in spite of the skies opening. I truly am warmed to see all of you here this evening. Thank you. I think that remembering is a tricky thing. Our memories do different things with what was past, and we internalize that differently. And there is one name that needs to be spoken tonight, and that is Raymond Pebbles Medley. When I first came to Georgetown as a professor, He actually was part of the maintenance staff here. He was the one who actually spoke of the Black Georgetown community fondly, in detail, with memories. Through his memories, I met Carol Gibbs. And Carol really did a lot of the heavy lifting for the historical fact that you see in this video. Through Carol, I met remarkable pastors. Kirk Monroe, it's so good to see you again. Clinton Washington, and they introduced us to their congregation, who were then able to share this treasure with us. So it's a confluence of memories and a confluence of connections. A lot happened before the book, before the video. Many conversations, many shared stories, and I was always impressed with how honest people were, how truthful they were, how generous they were to share their memories of Georgetown as well. When the Bicentennial Project actually got going, I remember sitting in a room of various university administrators and faculties, and they were coming up with wonderful ideas for how to celebrate the 200th anniversary of Georgetown University. Nothing Black came up. And I thought to myself, this is Washington, D.C. There must be a history here somewhere. And I remembered Raymond Pebbles Medley and what he had told. And that is what actually got the ball rolling, and that's what produced this wonderful project. So I would really just like to thank the production of memory, the production of stories. Without those, things like this are impossible. The other thing that I think is tricky about remembering is that we tend to think that the history that we are seeing here, the history we've come to celebrate, is that history. But these were people's lives. People went through a process when Georgetown went from their homes to the Georgetown we know today. And I don't want us to forget that that process was not always easy. I was shocked coming here and having to rediscover what it meant to someone when your home is no longer your home, when the things that you can do in a community you can no longer do. And I feel particularly gratified that if we can get a fraction of that story out, if we can get a fraction of that story remembered, that is a blessing. The other thing about this project that I think is important is that it is a very resonant project. What happened in Georgetown is happening in so many communities. I'm talking to people today. I haven't been here for a while as a permanent resident, but apparently it's happening in other neighborhoods of Washington, D.C. also. And I think communities naturally do change, but we have to also remember what is the cost of those changes. What happens to people's lives? What happens to people's histories when those changes are enacted? So even though this title is actually in the past, its content, its thrust, its meaning is very, very current and something that I hope we remember every time we think about what does the word community mean, what does the word home mean, and who is affected when communities change and go into transition. And again, thank you for coming out, and thank you for sharing your time with us this evening.
Well, I'd like to say good evening also, and it's delightful to be here. I came in from Los Angeles, where I live now, and it's just wonderful to see so many familiar faces from 25 years ago working on this project. And I've had the great good fortune to keep in contact with many of the folks that I worked with on this project. It was one of those sort of transformative projects where many of us, I look at Reverend Monroe's face right there, we became friends. And friendships that have endured all these years. So it's a great treat to be back here. I'd also like to say a special thank you to Richard Brown and the staff at the Georgetown University Press. I worked very closely with them on this new edition, and it's a beautiful book that we can all be very proud of. So I wanted to say that tonight. I'm just going to share with you some very sort of personal remembrances I have of making the documentary video and researching and writing the book with my co-authors Valerie Babb and Carol Gibbs. I remember how excited and how special Father Curry, the director of the university's bicentennial, and Father Tim Healy, who was president of Georgetown University at that time, felt when Valerie Babb brought the bicentennial program committee, of which I was the head of, her concept for making a documentary video about the history of the Black Georgetown community. And we took Val's concept and ran with it, and David Powell came aboard, and you've seen the results of it here tonight. But I also wanted to say that both Father Curry and Father Healy told me when I signed on to the Bicentennial Project that they very much wanted to honor the Black community in Georgetown in some way, in some program, and make it part of the university's bicentennial celebration. So that was a goal from the outset. I also wanted to tell you something that I was very proud to hear. A mutual friend of mine who worked at the Department of Education, she was a high-ranking official there, shared with me years later that Father Healy had come to visit her, and the Black Georgetown book was sitting on the coffee table in her office, and he picked it up and looked at her in the eyes and told her this was his favorite bicentennial project. So that was a very special moment for me. One thing I think you should know is that when we began the project, the video particularly, nobody knew anybody, right? So I suggested that I call the pastors of the Black churches and see if we could have some kind of an event at the university so we could sort of meet and greet and get to know each other and get this ball rolling, this project started. And I first spoke with Reverend Kirk Monroe, and he was enthusiastic and said, sure, we'll come up and I'll bring some members of the church, and I called the rest of the pastors. So we had everybody over. This was in December of 1988, and we saw the slideshow for the bicentennial at the library that David Powell had produced. And then we all walked over to our little bicentennial house on O Street, and we had a reception. And I can still remember Eva Calloway, who was in her 90s then. She was seated in Father Curry's chair in his office, and we were all standing around and laughing, and she had a big smile on her face, and all of a sudden that smile turned to some tears rolling down her cheeks, and she told us all that she had lived in Georgetown all her life, and this was only the second time that she'd ever stepped foot on the Georgetown campus. And when you read the book, she had been born and raised on Prospect Street, very close to the university campus, and she said as a young girl, she would tell the time of day by the bell tower, the clock in the bell tower. And when the first time she came on campus in 1980, she said she just wept because she looked up at that tower and she couldn't believe she was actually on the campus. Another special memory for me was, and might be echoing some of what David Powell said, when we conducted the interviews for the video in the church basement of Jerusalem Baptist Church, like David Powell, I remember some very emotionally charged moments when people would ask us to turn the cameras off, turn all the recorders off, and they'd share some very private memories about living in Georgetown during the decades of segregation. It was a very powerful and moving experience to be in the room, to share those moments with people. And there were a lot of tears shed, and as we all got to know each other better, there were a lot of hugs, too, in that room. Well, a very treasured moment that I remembered that I wanted to share with you was that I spent over 100 hours in Mount Zion's community house with Carter Bowman Jr. He was the church archivist and a member of the Board of Trustees. And we were identifying the photographs for the book that were archived in old cardboard boxes stacked on the dirt floor of the community house. Now, those of you who knew Carter, and you knew what a powerful, dignified, soft-spoken, and cautious man he was. He had signed up to be interviewed for our video, but he didn't show up for his appointment, but I knew he was in the room because somebody pointed him out. But he was watching and learning. After I passed around a draft of the book manuscript in the community, particularly to the English teachers and journalists like Pauline Gaskins Mitchell for their comments, I shared their comments with Carter, particularly their question. They said, well, you have the Peters sisters, the tennis stars in the book, but where are all the black male athletes? And I said to Carter, nobody will tell me anything about them. And he just kind of looked at me, and at our final meeting a few weeks later, as I was leaving the community house, he handed me a brown paper bag, and I opened it as soon as I got in the car, and inside the bag was a framed photograph of Carter as captain of the Tuskegee Golden Tigers football team. And it's a great picture in the book when you see it. It was a very poignant moment for me because I knew then that Carter trusted us and that the Black Georgetown Remembered Project now had his blessing. And that was really something. Just a couple more memories. A few years later, after the book had been produced, I moderated a program at the Martin Luther King Jr. Library where we showed the video and then we had a panel discussion similar to this tonight. And towards the end of the program, a Black Georgetowner stood up and delivered a message to the younger members of the audience, and I've never forgotten it. He said, it's all about ownership. Own your own property, and then you'll have a choice. And I just has echoed in my mind ever since. And I know the Reginald Martin family is here tonight. They were in the audience that night. Reginald, are you out there? Do you remember you stood up and you shared with us that night how proud you were to have your grandfather, correct? Oh, it was your father who said it. Okay. Well, stood up and said how proud they were to have their ancestor on the cover of our book. And I won't go into detail, but when we selected this picture, pardon me? Oh, I had my book on my mic. Okay. Well, all this adds up to basically one major sort of long-lasting remembrance and conclusion in my mind. In order to share space and create neighborhoods, we need opportunities to get to know one another, to build relationships based on trust and mutual respect, and in the best cases, to become caring neighbors and friends. Just as Richard Brown said in his introduction tonight, neighborhoods aren't just about land, they're not just about historic buildings, they're really about people. People trusting each other, living side by side, and sharing a common experience. And this is what we really hoped to document in the video and the book. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, they've given us a short window to talk in. And there's no way in the world that I can talk about 77 years of Georgetown in a short period. But I do want to mention that I'm a third generation Georgetown Washingtonian, but I have fourth generation son here and fifth generation grandsons here, so I'm very proud of that. I was born not in a hospital, but in the apartments at 1404 26th Street Northwest, across from the Rose Park Playground. Christened at Mount Zion United Methodist Church, established in 1816, and celebrating 200 years in Georgetown, the oldest African American congregation in D.C. I attended Sunday school there and been a member since. I attended nursery school, which they call now preschool, at First Baptist Church at Dumbarton Avenue and 27th. An early elementary in D.C. segregated school system at Phillips. And in the older kids, as they matriculated through Phillips, then they went to Wormley, which was right down the street from here. One of the things I liked about going to nursery school was that I had a crush on Sandra Dotson. Some of you may remember her. She's now Sandra Raspberry, who also attended and lived across the street from First Baptist Church. There's a great truth in the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Georgetown was a family community, and a community alive with the sound of children. There were families, the Jacksons, the Bowmans, the Clarks, the Dotsons, some you saw up here, the Clarks, the Wrights, the Waters, the Beesons. And there was a family that I always called the Gateway family because they lived on P Street right at Rock Creek Park as you came into Georgetown, and that was Dottie Harris's family. There are a few, these are just a few of the numerous families that made up the community. During the early years, there were a few white families who lived in the neighborhoods. However, I never remembered seeing any white children. One white lady, I can remember, Miss Barnhart, some of you may remember, on O Street. And I remember her because at Halloween, she always had the greatest treats for the kids. Washington, of course, was segregated, and the black community in Georgetown was more or less a self-sustaining neighborhood. During deportation, or gentrification in today's terms, my family moved to 18th Street, but we never left Georgetown. I say village because everything was there for our community. There were folks who lived in less than ideal conditions, as well as those who lived in great conditions for that time. Dr. Marshall, who certified my delivery because my cousins did the delivery and Dr. Marshall came by later. My cousins lived in the next apartment building. He lived on P Street. There were two doctors at least, Dr. Dotson, and you saw his daughter, Jean Dotson, on the video there. There was a pharmacist, Dr. Smith, who owned a drugstore at 27th and P Street. And she had the audacity to have a soda fountain in there, and you could go in and get a soda made with ice cream or whatever you wanted, shakes and what have you. And just a few other places. There were barber shops, there were beauty shops, and there were grocery stores. Now, the grocery stores were not owned by blacks, but most of the other businesses were. And even several blocks from here at 32nd and O Street, there was a family, the Marshall family, who owned several shops, or a shop down the street here, just right near this campus. And they had a tailor shop, they did rug cleaning, they did hat blocking, they did everything. And so we also had roving vendors that came through periodically. There was a guy who was a knife sharpener, some of you remember, the vegetable truck, the watermelon man, the good humor truck, ice cream truck, the coal man, the ice man, and the pony ride truck, and others. On Sundays, a great activity for the kids was to borrow a DC Transit pass from adults in the community and ride the bus and streetcar to the end of the line and return. If you were fortunate enough to have a nickel, we would stop by the High's Dairy Store on P Street between 20th and 21st Street and get a huge ice cream cone and walk the rest of the way to Georgetown. Rose Park Playground and the churches were the centerfolds of the community. We were at the playground more than we were in the house. For me, it was a walk out the front door, across the street, and on to the program, or to the playground. I loved it when the man would come with the mule-driven mower to cut the grass at Rose Park playground. And the neighborhood would always smell so fresh. Now, you know that's a long time ago when people were using a mule to pull the mower. In summer, there was Vacation Bible School on a rotating basis at one of the black churches, Mount Zion, Jerusalem, First Baptist, Epiphany, Alexandria Memorial, and then Ebenezer. There was also the Epiphany May Day Parade, where all the kids were dressed in white, and they had floats and homemade decorations, and that was a big event in the black community. Baseball games on the Rose Park ball field were played by local young men and attended by the community as if it was played in a stadium. Even after we were forced out of Georgetown because of gentrification, the young folks would still come back daily and weekly for activities in the community. Sometimes you would see groups of 15 to 20 kids from different neighborhoods and churches walking to Georgetown. As I grew older and young ladies came into fashion, we would gather at Mount Zion for Methodist Youth Fellowship on Sunday evenings and then venture to an impromptu dance and parties around the corner at Monica's mom's house or Beverly Gray's home a few doors down the street. Most of the kids in Georgetown attended Francis Junior High on N Street and senior high in one of the black high schools in D.C. Another highlight in growing up in Georgetown was the challenge of climbing the Carbon steps down the street. This was like receiving a merit badge in the Scouts. There were always plenty of activities between the churches and the playground. It was a treat to be able to go to the Mott Theater that you heard about on 25th Street, especially to see the cowboy movies. Shopping on M Street and Wisconsin Avenue was a great event because going to the Five and Dime store was like being in a department store downtown. Especially at Christmas, you could buy the whole family a gift with less than a quarter. There is much more to share with you about the Black Georgetown Village community. But I thank those who saw it as important to document such a rich and vibrant history, to preserve the real Georgetown.
Good evening, everyone, and I am just sitting in my seat and I just feel the love and joy tonight here at this celebration. My name is Dr. Monica Roche, and I am sitting here as a proud descendant of the African American community here in Georgetown, a proud descendant of the slaves, the free people, the store owners, the businesses, the rich community that we often just don't talk about anymore. I am blessed to still be a resident here as a fifth generation Georgetowner. And I wanted to keep the memories going. My mom, I wasn't ready for the video. I had a script. I'm gonna go off the script and speak from the heart. I watched the video and I wasn't ready just to see the old memories and got a little emotional in the seat. And I said, wow, how much has changed in 25 years. The change had already happened, but how many more families that have lost or have, the gentrification is the word we use, but when you know the true reason why African Americans left Georgetown and what happened to their homes and things like that. So we have to celebrate, and I feel it's my role is to continue to the generations and to not forget this past. And I remember, 25 years ago, how my mother was just so excited to work with Kathleen and everyone, people on the panel and people in the audience, and what it meant to her finally to have the stories told. Neville's dad was instrumental. And so when I won as I won 2 years ago as the first African American to win the position as ANC commissioner here in Georgetown. It was my mission to continue to say, every time I can, don't forget the African American residents that once lived here. What can I do to continue the legacy? What can I do to continue to spread the history? And I can't thank the Rose Park, Friends of Rose Park community for helping to lead the efforts to get the Peters sisters, the tennis court dedicated to the Peters sisters, who were legends in the African American community and legends throughout the country in tennis. And it means so much to spread the word. For those who know me, know I'm all over social media, and I don't think I could have spread this enough the last few months. But when we think about Georgetown, you have to think about the oldest living resident, who I have to acknowledge, who is here tonight on the front row, Miss Daisy Peebles-Sewell, who is 95 years old. Can we please help her up? Can we help her up? Can we help? So this is Black Georgetown, 95 years old. And what I didn't mention is she still lives in Georgetown on 27th Street. So that in itself is a blessing. And before I finish, when I saw the weather, I started, oh my goodness, people are going to come out and the former residents. So we can't talk about remembering Black Georgetown if we don't acknowledge the residents of Black Georgetown. At this time, could anyone who's African American, who lived, resided, go to church now, or once went to church, who call themselves a Georgetowner, could you please stand? So, thank you again for coming out.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Now it's my turn, all right? This is the comic relief. But anyway, I'm tremendously humbled and honored to be here on this panel. And I do want to take a few moments to share some memories. I have a tremendous reverence for the past and an appreciation for the legacy that has been left to me, and truly inspired by my ancestors. And since we're here to talk about this book, I do want to point out on pages 118 and 171, there's reference to an ancestor of mine, Charles Turner. And the reference on both page 118 and 171 refers to him as the Black mayor of Georgetown. Now, those of you who do know me and who call me the unofficial mayor of Washington will now truly understand that, where this comes from. It's natural. I've always been somebody who tried to be very much in the moment and not dwell much on the past and look too far to the future. But on an evening like this and on this occasion, there were some particular memories that were conjured up, and individuals, Mr. Ed and Jimmy Gray, and, both Dr. Dotson and Dr. Marshall. I mean, you just walked across the street to have a physical by a doctor. It was incredible. The Beesons. I am old enough to remember there was a man that used to come around on Saturday mornings. He was the knife sharpener, and he'd always ring this bell. Ding, 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 ding. Ding, 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 ding. Clearly, it imprinted. And I was always fascinated by the fact that he would be there like clockwork every Saturday morning, and people would have him sharpen their knives. And I just remember that, one Saturday, that ding, 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 ding wasn't there. And You know, he was an older gentleman. I presume maybe he passed away, but that was sort of a precursor to some of the changes that were occurring in Georgetown. You know, I remember my grandfather, who bought the house that I live in now, was very proud of the fact that one of his part-time gigs was at the Cosmos Club. I recently found out that one of the reasons that he liked it was that at the end of the evening, he would pour the good liquor into the mayonnaise jar and smuggle that out. You know, don't hate the player. But I remember that he was particularly proud of the fact that on one occasion he had served, you know, President Eisenhower, and the fact that there was that close proximity to the President of the United States really was something very powerful for him. And I also can recall how important it was the first time we had home rule and he was able to vote. Again, that's something that imprinted upon me the importance of participating in democracy and always voting. And I veer off script a moment just to encourage everyone to please vote in November. It doesn't really matter who, as long as you don't vote for Donald Trump. Someone else mentioned earlier about Rose Park, and indeed, I mean, I feel like I grew up there. I mean, that was the social life, the center of all social life. You know, basketball, football, baseball, ping pong, you name it, it was there, except there was no swimming pool. And I couldn't go to Francis. That was another neighborhood. I couldn't go to Georgetown. That was another neighborhood. I was stuck at Rose Park. So to this day, I don't know how to swim because Rose Park still doesn't have a swimming pool. I also have a close bond with the 7-Eleven on 27th and P. And it's interesting how if ever I tell somebody when I live on P Street and I say, oh, you know where the 7-Eleven? Oh, yeah. And they've always been there at like 3 o'clock in the morning. But I actually remember when the 7-Eleven opened, again, showing my age, because that first day it opened, they were giving us free Slurpees. I must have had 10 Slurpees the first day, all right? So by the second day, I'm hooked, you know? I'm an addict. I got to get that fixed. And they're like, it's a nickel. I was, Mom, I need a quarter for some Slurpees. So, you know, that the 7-Eleven is an institution for me. And given where my house is, it was close enough proximity to DuPont Circle and Wisconsin Avenue to be able to get to those places, have access to the social life and nightlife. And it was a big deal when I was able to cross Wisconsin Avenue to come here to this campus, you know, just so I could, you know, talk to a college girl. And I remember how, yeah, thank you for laughing. Like, well, a 15-year-old, you know, come on. I had game. But then eventually I did come here to go to school, and it was a very, very meaningful to me to be able to attend Georgetown, having grown up here, and understanding the history and the role of the university and Father Healy's place. And I'm very proud of that fact that I am a Hoya. You know, I wrap up really by saying I recently moved back into the house that I grew up in, and my master bedroom is actually the room that my father was both born and died in. And it's a very powerful, emotional thing. You know, I really feel the energy, and it's wonderful to be back. And even though things have changed, there's an incredible comfort level and familiarity with being in Georgetown, and being a part of the history of Black Georgetown Remembered. And really, I think ultimately, as it was said there, we were proud to be Georgetowners. And I think the most important, relevant, and really enduring message that I would impart here is that what Georgetown means to me is a great deal of pride. And excuse me, as I said, I like to live in the moment, so I need to get this selfie here real quick. Yeah. Yeah.
I got a feeling you have plenty of those. So thank you very much, all. And I'd like to ask Dr. Roche to, there are a few people from Georgetown we want to ask to give a short 1 or 2 minute statement, so Dr. Roche will identify you and will speak.
First, I want to say no, hearing about the parties our parents had, we got to work on that. He's my next door neighbor. So yeah, we'll continue that. Okay, at this time, I'd like
Invitation only.
Yes, invitation only. I would like to invite Dorothy Harris Gray to make a statement. If there's a mic, she's sitting on the fourth row here. And Barbara Ricks Thompson will go second, who's a row behind her, to share her. Come on the aisle, please.
Hello. I am plenty of roots, have plenty of roots in Georgetown. My great-grandmother and grandfather were among the founders of Mount Zion, and my mother was a founder of Epiphany. Now, Neville was talking about all of the games that they played, but they didn't mention the tennis team that Rose Park had. We had a fabulous tennis team, and we participated in tournaments at Banneker High School. And Rose Park always brought home first place single, first place double, and the girls, I brought home first place too. And then again, from 1989, we're talking about getting together, all right, from 1989 to 2003, there were a group of us called the Black Georgetown Reunion Committee. Yes. And in the fall, we had a dinner dance, at which time we had from 250 to 300 former Georgetowners and those who were still living in Georgetown. And then in the spring, we did a religion service. We went to each church every year. At one time, we recognized the different members suggested by their ministers. The second time we went around, we donated $500 to the Sunday schools. And the third time we went around, we donated in memory of some of the members. So we have really, even though we moved out, we still stay together. And our motto was, once a Georgetowner, always a Georgetowner.
Good evening, everyone. I want to just share 1 or 2 memories. One of the things that I remember well is that we were able to attend or visit or use the library here in Georgetown, and I don't remember it being in a segregated fashion. I think that was one of the few things in the community that made it possible for us to feel like we belonged even more. I also have fond memories of school here, and one of my greatest memories is that Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt came to Phillips School to one of the activities for the Student Council, and I was president at that time and had the opportunity to introduce her. So that's as close to a first lady as I've ever been, and probably will ever be. But anyway, she came to Georgetown. And then another memory I have is that Gene Kelly played tennis on our tennis courts. And many of the young people, we enjoyed being there. And someone the other day asked me, well, did you play tennis? I said, well, I played at tennis. That's probably what a lot of us did, but we enjoyed it. And then the recreation department at the playground had many, many activities for us. And I recall that each summer, my father expected that each of his children would, at the end of the summer, have something to put on display when the playground had its closing exercises, because that was his way of knowing that we had been there, we had done something, and not wasted away the summertime. And that included, we also went to day camp, which was a way of at least getting more familiar with nature and developing more social relationships and just learning how to be leaders, because that was a part of what was expected in that program. Thank you.
Can I just add one more thing? I just wanted to recognize, we've talked so much about Rose Park and the Peters sisters there. Fanny and James, the son and daughter of, you all could stand there here tonight.
Thank you all. And now we'll open up for a few minutes of discussion. Before that, I should tell you that this book, Georgetown, Black Georgetown Remembered, has perhaps spurred on a revival of the study of Washington, D.C. history. And so now many new books have come out on the recent period. So I won't mention all of them. I won't mention any of them. But I would just say, please, it wouldn't be fair. So please do that. Now, we'll open up for some questions. I should tell you, though, that, you know, I'm as mad as anybody about gentrification. I could go on for days and days about any neighborhood and everything, and I could give you the numbers. I actually could give you the numbers. But I've restrained myself because this is Black Georgetown Remembered Night. And it's hard to restrain yourself because we see what's happened in Georgetown. Black Georgetown lives, but Black Georgetown has changed, and the city has changed. And so as I ask you to come forward, please direct your questions. And there'll be time to vent your anger about the city in other places. I'll find you a place, but tonight, believe me, I will. So please, if you have questions, please direct them to yes, Reverend.
I have a question. I live and work in Baltimore. In our office, we have pumped in WEAA Morgan Station. And just about 2 weeks ago, there was a mention about the cemeteries, the Mount Zion Cemetery and the Female Union Band Cemetery. I think that I would just like to hear a word about that. If someone with Vernon or someone think about the cemetery, or Neville, somebody speak about the cemetery, just a little bit about any updates about what's going on with the cemeteries that are so important to the black community.
Yeah, there's been a great deal of interest of recent of the cemetery. I know our pastor, Pastor Cogman, has been working with Dumbarton United Methodist Church, who originally owned the cemetery, and the Female Union Band. Dr. Page, Dr. Thornell Page is here, who has been a part of that program and working on it. Mount Zion tries to keep up the cemetery. We have a lot of great plans of things that we want to see happen there because it is a historic site. And you know, we just want to get it done, but there are a lot of legal things we are working with, and once we can climb all of those mountains, then we should come down off of the rough side of the mountain. Yeah.
And I'll just add, indeed, he speaks to some legal issues which we don't need to get into, but were very complicating. And it is, on some level, somewhat sad to see the current condition because of the headstones that got moved. And they're in a very fragile condition at the moment, and you know, that's part of trying to figure out how to preserve that and recognize that. But I also to take a tremendous to heart, because I remember as a little kid going up there with my grandfather and being frightened because of the condition. I mean, it was overgrown, there were bushes. I mean, I really felt like there were ghosts walking around on that property. So the fact that, and that was, let's see, I was a little kid, what was that, about maybe 5, 6 years ago? the fact that from that period to now, you know, where we've gotten, I realize that it's a long struggle. It's not something that may get resolved in the next year or so. But much like what we are doing here with Remembering Black Georgetown, that land was there before we were. It's going to be there afterwards, and if we can put the things in place now that have to build a foundation from, I'd like to think that you know, the next generation and the generations beyond that will have something that they will be able to look upon with that Georgetown pride.
Has it been declared a historic landmark at all?
Yes, it has. I think for us right now, the biggest thing is really forming an ongoing fundraising plan in order to implement some of the larger scale capital projects around the cemetery.
I believe in the book in 1991, Pauline Gaskins Mitchell was very involved in that project, and she told us that the goal was to create a park, a national park there. Is that still on the table?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
What really happened to Georgetown. And when I came to D.C. 30 years ago, I wasn't told anything about gentrification. I was told that homes were taken from African American people who lived in Georgetown by the government under eminent domain and quote unquote condemned and given to developers after they were renovated, and I was told renovation meant they painted the porches white and then gave them or sold them to developers. If that's not true, please correct me. And if it is true, why wasn't, in this day and age, the descendants, why don't they sue the government or the developers for taking their property? I mean, I'm not a lawyer, maybe it's not, but it seems to me if their homes were taken, I mean, the Jews sued.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Let him ask the question. Thank you.
There was legislation. There was actual. I'll let you. Okay.
Hold a second, my friend. Hold on a second. You get your time.
I just want to say there was actual legislation. The old Georgetown Act, I believe was the title, which did not permit when blacks had money to even purchase. They were not allowed to sell to African Americans. When people were purchasing homes and buying their homes, they had to promise they would never sell their property. So that was one way to keep us out once we were gone. But yes, Bubby.
I am a resident of a rental property there.
Use the mic.
I am a second or third generation Washingtonian. Yes. Oh, I'm a third, fourth, maybe fifth generation Georgetownian.
Wow.
Nevertheless, we never owned anything. We always rented, always had to move because whomever owned the property could make money off selling it to someone else, which they did. My family had to move. And this is some of the incidents that occurred that made things possible the way it is now.
I just want to add that right next to Mount Zion Church, there's a row of houses that were built by Alfred Pope, who we bought the land from for $2,500 to build Mount Zion. Those houses were almost condemned when blacks lived in them. Now they're selling for $700,000 and $800,000, $900,000.
More than that.
More.
More than that.
So, I mean, that's the kind of thing. A lot of the houses in Georgetown did not have indoor plumbing. There were some places that didn't have indoor plumbing. So, you know, when the railroad comes through, if you're not on the train, you get run over. So that's what happened.
If you are interested in the history, there's a chapter in the book that goes into it. I spent a lot of time researching the records at the Georgetown Neighborhood Council. So that information is there that explains the impact of the Georgetown Act on the residents who live there.
Thank you. We have a question down here.
Yes. I'm aware that perhaps you've answered this somewhat. Excuse me, I was blocking a view. Okay. I know that the answer is probably in the book, but also I'm aware that the industrial PAC also supported the black community back in the day. Mm-hmm. But as far as Georgetown business ownership, how were they able to get money and financing to establish their businesses? And how were they able to continue those businesses at that time?
Thank you.
Well, I really don't know where they got the money from. There were a number of people. Georgetown was a port city, and a number of the people worked at the ports and probably gained money and they pooled their monies together, like the family, the Marshall family that I'm speaking of up 32nd Street. They own 3 or 4 houses, properties up there. When you look at the story of Yarrow Mamad, who had a place in Georgetown, and he was a business person, a slave who came over from Africa. And so it's amazing when you look at how they survived in Georgetown, because take, for instance, our church. They built our church on the pennies and nickels and dimes of people who cleaned houses. The church was finished in 1880, started in like the late 1860s. And they pooled their money together, and they built these places. Today, it's hard to get people to buy, to build, to pool their money together. You got banks who are redlining folks and what have you. But they worked hard. They cleaned houses, they washed laundry, they did all those kinds of things. And that money was built on those places are built and they financed themselves on the backs of sweat, blood, and tears.
Thank you. Is Jim Johnston here? Still here? Well, Jim Johnston is the author of a book on Yarrow Mammoth. He would take a minute and a half to tell you about the house, which he just mentioned.
Yarrow Mammoth. I wrote the book From Slave Ship to Harvard about Yarrow Mammoth. And last summer, I got the city to do archaeology dig on the property and to see if there was any remnant from his time period there. So far, they haven't identified anything except that we're on financing. The most interesting thing they did identify was a box underground at the level of the soil from his time. My view, I'm more of a romantic than the archaeologists are. My view is that that's where he buried his money, but he had a lot. Thank you.
Maurice?
I was going to, if I could just answer the question just briefly. My grandmother, a little bit later than that, used to run the gambling joint at the corner of 28th and M. They lived at 1205, which is now George's, the falafel shop. But across the street, she had the gambling joint. She'd fix fried chicken, and she'd take some juice off the top. So that was one of the ways that we made our money.
Thank you. Kathy?
Yes, Alfred Pope was one of the most successful businessmen in Georgetown in the 19th century. And there are some of his descendants here with us tonight. His granddaughter and daughter, I believe, great-granddaughter and granddaughter. And they didn't get a chance to say anything earlier, so I'd just like to recognize Jean Williams Bailey, who's of the Pope family.
I can let you know how Alfred Pope received his money. When his uncle, well, at that time he was a slave, and when his uncle passed away, he freed all his slaves and gave all of them money. And so Alfred Pope and his mother and Hannah Pope lived with John Carter. So they put their money together. And he was able to start his own businesses with that. Lumber, he had lumber and coal.
Ice.
And he
Ice.
also had his business where they went around and what they call well, they didn't have bathrooms inside.
Scavenger?
Yeah. So he had slaves and he had freemen, and they would go around and clean out the outhouses. So that's how he earned his money to build his house on. He had his first house was burnt down, but the second house on O Street.
29th and
29th and O Street. He built that one on. Yeah, and he lost his house because of the will. So when he died, his children and they broke the will. So that's how he lost. They lost that house.
And we are talking about the period prior to the 1950s as well. So it's not as if these are modern times where you would have to go into a bank with collateral, with a business plan. Many of the business people who were in Georgetown were the banks. They were the ones who lent money to other businesses. The community was so tight-knit, the consumer was there. They supported the businesses. So it was this kind of beautiful financial loop that went on that I don't think we see much in modern times.
And there was the Freedmen's Bank, which they could bank with.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Beside myself to be where Patrick Ewing used to play basketball. We used to watch him on TV, so go Hoyas. I mean, that's big. But what I'd like what I'd like to ask is, how about when John Kennedy moved in? Does anybody remember that and how it impacted? I've heard it changed everything, so can anybody expound upon that? Thank you.
I was gone from there by then.
Well,
no,
we do know this.
Yes.
We know that the house that John Kennedy bought had a codicil against blacks living there.
In the book.
Codicil. It's an arrangement to a will. Codicil. It's an arrangement to a will. And we do know that there was one on Lyndon Johnson's house, and he removed it. He got it removed legally because he did not. He wanted it done, but he did not want the publicity. So he got it removed, and Kennedy never did. Of course, George Bush has one on Kennedy Bunkport right now, still. So that's just a little. I don't know. You know why better than me. I'm not getting into that.
I can.
But you get me, yeah. And there were housing covenants in many houses where a person could not buy a house. For example, a Jewish person could not buy a house in Shepherd Park, in many places. So, of course, blacks, and they would be there, and it would be the same derogatory names about a Jewish person as was mentioned by the black, until Joe Raw and Marvin Kaplan, around the time of 1954, came in and challenged the laws. So go ahead.
Anyway, I used to play with Carolyn. John is a little younger than me, but they would come down to Rose Park. I had one of my best friends was a little white dude, so he and Carolyn kind of had a little thing. When we're talking like, whatever, 6, 8 years old, how much of a thing can you have? But I remember it being said, and I don't know if this was my parents, probably. I mean, that's sort of your world, but that it was expressed how pleased they were that the Kennedy's kids could play with black kids at Rose Park. And that's also, again, indicative of sort of the culture at Rose Park. Rose Park was one of the few integrated playgrounds in Washington. But that's as much as I recall. If anything, my grandmother, who was a Turner, which kind of meant something in Georgetown, to her, it was like, well, yeah, the Kennedys, but, we was here first.
A question over there.
Yes, ma'am. Good. And over here. Stand up for us,
Mike,
please.
Fanny.
Stand up.
And say who you are.
Hi, my name is Fannie Walker Weeks, and I'm the daughter of Romania Peters Walker. I also remember playing with the Kennedys. They would come to Rose Park, and I met Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, and she brought John and Caroline, and they came to Rose Park, and we played as children. So I also remember that. And I also remember going by their house, you know, walking by their house when we were small. So, you know, they were the president's children, but they were just children, just like anybody else, and we had fun together.
Last night I was trying to get out of Georgetown, and it was blocked up. And the reason it's blocked up is because, what's his name, DiCaprio and Portman, they're playing, you know, the Kennedys, and so all the streets are blocked out. So the mystique still lives. So yes, ma'am, and then right over here. Yes, ma'am.
I'm looking for someone who can possibly help me. I never lived in Georgetown, but I'm a descendant of the Smackums, Charles Adams Smackum, and also the other, the Smackums that live there, as well as the Colberts. If anyone can help me, it's Charles Adams Smackum, it's Cecilia Smackum. I'm looking for help in that area. I'm her great-great-granddaughter, and Hillary Smackum.
Right there. We can
Yes, ma'am. Somebody back there will help you before the night's over. Okay.
Is that Janet?
The mic, Janet.
There's your cousin right there.
Get the mic. Can she get a mic?
While she's getting the mic, let me say that in Georgetown, everybody seemed to be related, but didn't have to have. And you didn't talk about gossip was not something you did because you didn't know who you were talking about.
And Vernon, I don't remember mules, but I think I'm a little younger than you. I'm Janice Haynes Davis. I'm a Bowman. I'm Carter Bowman's niece. So Mr. Bowman just passed 2 years ago, and his son just passed about 3 months ago. And he talked a lot about you, and he is a historian, et cetera. And my aunt talked to the Smackums. She's Catherine Bowman, so you are related to us. And I do remember the Kennedys. And actually, Teddy Kennedy had a lot more integration into the community. When the Kennedys moved up the street, which was on P Street, they were a little bit distant from us. But the other Kennedys were much more integrated in the community because it was still rather segregated. So I won't expound on that, but just listen to what I said underneath all of that.
Gentleman here.
And I was born in the house on P Street next to these 2 little kids here who are about my daughters and my daughter's ages.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Right over here. Yes, ma'am. Right there.
Get the mic, Monica, please. This is my cousin.
My name is Monica Turner, and my great-great-grandfather was Moses Booth. I'm very proud of that, of what the Booth family did, their presence in Georgetown. My grandfather is a Turner, and I believe is connected to Georgetown as well. I have to do some digging on that. But I just want to say thank you because Monica and I are cousins, but the Booth part of our family, many of them moved out of Georgetown, I'm sure for various reasons that have already been discussed. But my grandmother always, the names that are here, I have heard all of the names because my grandparents continued, my grandmother Booth married a Turner, so they continued to attend Mount Zion and were very, very proud of their heritage in the Georgetown community. But we, the children, are not as connected. And so I'm a granddaughter, and I'm just really, really grateful for all of the work that you all did to put this book together. It means so much to me, and I look forward to meeting and interacting more with Black Georgetown. So thank you.
Thank you. So why don't we take one more? Why don't we take one more?
Maurice,
one more.
This gentleman's been trying to speak right here.
I'm sorry, I just couldn't see. It's okay.
No problem. Thank you very much. I'd like to know if there is consensus or is there an agreed upon term to use, and I think I heard from the podium, deportation, in describing the exiting of blacks from Georgetown. If I want to tell that story, I want to be correct in using the term? Is there consensus as to what we should use in describing?
Deportation was my term. Gentrification is the term that was used in that day. But as we know today, deportation is the term that's being used as they want to move people out of the United States. They didn't get us out of the United States, but they sure the hell got us out of Georgetown.
Well, how do you all describe it? Is there an agreed upon term?
No.
Okay,
No,
thank you.
it's not.
No. Okay.
Thank you, sir. We call that a Rickism. A Rickism. So does anybody on the panel have any final words?
Removal, I think, is also a very valid term.
What term?
Removal.
People removal, gentrification. It's called getting rid of rent control, high prices.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And the records do show that. It shows. Now, how do you define when someone sees that they can make a profit and then they start condemning houses and the people who live there have to leave? Or how do you define when someone can make a profit and then they start raising real estate taxes so high that people can't afford to pay them? So where do you show intent so that I don't know how to say, yes, it was deliberate, but as you look at record after record after record, and they're all so similar, such similar motivations, some conclusions float around.
And there are patterns, there are redlining patterns where you can't get a loan. It's not, after the 6-day riots, blacks could not get loans for the business that were burned out. That's common. It's very common for landlords to just flood the building or to cut the heat off, or it happens all over the country. It just so happens that Georgetown represented the first area. But communities all over Washington, Petworth, Bloomingdale, Columbia Heights, you can name almost any community, Adams Morgan, and it is common. So that is why the rich history of Georgetown in the book that was published was set the pace for other studies. So before I turn it over to Mr. Brown, I should say that I expect everybody to go and buy every book there. None are left. It's raining. Nobody wants to carry those books home but you. They're only $27. You'll get them autographed right now. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Maurice. Thank you, panelists. Dave Powell, the Gospel and Chapel Choir, and all of you for being here this evening. The night is still young. There's time for a reception, and it will be downstairs on the second floor. There are books for sale nearby right outside the door. There are information tables. I encourage you to take a look at those. On behalf of Georgetown University Press, on behalf of everyone at Georgetown, I want to thank you for being part of this special event. May you enjoy the rest of your evening. May you find the strength, illumination, and inspiration in the remaining days of Black History Month and in Black Georgetown remembered. Thank you.